Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something fascinating, and let's be honest, a little bit uncomfortable.
Hmm.
We're going to explore the deep programming of human nature. We're not talking about, relationship columns or therapy. We are going way, way back.
All the way back, we're talking about the primal evolutionary roots of how we mate.
Exactly. We're trying to figure out why, from a purely biological standpoint, relationships can be so complicated, why that desire to commit is always seems to be fighting this other ancient impulse to just run wild.
That's right. We've got a really powerful stack of sources here today, and they all center on this one fundamental biological conflict inside Homo sapiens.
Okay.
It's this internal war between the evolutionary push to pair bond, to be the devoted father, and that ancient underlying urge for promiscuity. The playboy impulse, as the source
It's
calls it.
Playboy Impulse. I
Yeah.
like that. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that tension, this kind of dual operating system that we all seem to be carrying around.
Yeah, and one that still dictates so much of our behavior, even when we think we're being so modern, signing mortgages and using advanced contraception.
And a crucial point the sources make is how resources, or the agonizing lack of them, were the main thing that shaped these ancient conflicting desires in our ancestors.
That's the whole stage, really. We're starting with this foundational tension. On one hand, resource scarcity, and on the other, the sheer abundance of sperm.
An interesting contrast.
It is. We're looking at what we could call the evolutionary default strategy. For one sex, you have a virtually limitless supply of the reproductive vehicle sperm.
Right.
But for the species as a whole, there's this constant, stark reality of scarce resources. When food is tight, shelter is hard to find. The survival of the offspring becomes the ultimate decider.
So it's not just about making babies, it's about whether those babies can survive.
That's the selector. It trumps everything. It even trumps the simple urge to just reproduce.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about the deep-seated tension between the playboy and the father in the animal kingdom, and then how that same conflict plays out in human relationships.
It's a battle of ancient survival strategies, and they still define our deepest desires today.
So where do we start? What's the origin point for this whole conflict?
We have to start at the most fundamental biological level. Before you even factor in things like culture or emotion, most male animals default to what zoologists call the quantity strategy.
The quantity strategy.
It's the simplest, most cost-effective way to get your genes into the next generation.
And that strategy is based entirely on what? Minimizing the male's investment.
That's it exactly. The goal is to inseminate as many females as you possibly can, get a broad genetic distribution, and then you leave the survival of those offspring entirely to chance,
Or to the mother.
or to the mother, right? And it's all driven by the massive, continuous production of sperm. The asymmetry here is really the key.
What do you mean by asymmetry?
Well, an egg is biologically expensive. It's finite. It requires a huge bodily investment from the female. Sperm, on the other hand, is cheap. It's plentiful. It's virtually inexhaustible over a reproductive lifetime.
So any organism that can make millions of them.
Will inherently have spare sperm. And that abundance means that biologically seeking out multiple partners, what we might call sluttiness, is often the most straightforward and least costly default strategy.
Because the cost of the transaction for the male is so incredibly low, it's a tiny fraction of the cost the female bears.
A tiny fraction. It's a high-reward, low-cost gamble.
If you're an insect or a fish, that sounds like a great deal. But this is where the story starts to change, right? Especially for mammals and really specifically for us, for Homo sapiens.
Absolutely. The math completely flips on its head. And that's because human childhood is so long, so vulnerable, and unbelievably resource-intensive.
So for our hominid ancestors, that simple equation of, say, 20 quick flings that result in 10 children, that might actually be a total failure.
A total genetic failure. It could yield absolutely zero long-term success.
Because just being conceived isn't enough. Not by a long shot. Those 10 children need years and years of protection, of feeding.
Exactly. If those 10 children then starve, or if they're born into such a low-status spot in the tribe that they get pushed aside or preyed upon or just never make it to reproductive age themselves.
Then the whole quantity strategy was a waste of time.
A complete genetic dead end. And this harsh reality that human babies are just completely helpless for so long is why focusing on resources becomes the absolute non-negotiable key for your genes to survive long term.
So if that quantity strategy starts producing kids who are just starving or dying off, nature has to pivot. And this, I assume, is where the alternative comes in.
And this is the origin of the quality and investment strategy.
Okay.
The quality strategy means the male produces fewer total offspring, but, and this is the crucial part, he commits significant resources, his own labor, and his protective time to make sure that those specific few offspring actually survive.
And not just survive, but survive to become successful breeders themselves.
That's the goal. This shift from just sperm spreading to actual resource provisioning is maybe the single most important evolutionary pivot point for our species.
It's really interesting to think that the first push for male dedication wasn't some, early form of romantic love or altruism.
No, not a lot.
It's just a brutal, cold, evolutionary calculation. It's all about maximizing the chances that your specific genes make it through the high mortality meat grinder of the Pleistocene.
That is the core insight from our sources.
Yeah.
Any genetic mutations that caused males to actually focus their resources on one female and her babies instead of just, sprinting off after every other fertile female he saw, those were the mutations that got passed on.
Purely because their kids had a much, much higher survival rate.
Drastically higher. It's just simple math.
And this has a really interesting side effect, one that changes the whole social dynamic of an early human tribe. It's not just about the survival of the kids.
That's right. It affects the whole group. This shift in focus, from constantly fighting for every available female to dedicating your time and energy to investing in a specific family, it tones down the male competition a lot.
Because a dedicated father is a busy father.
A preoccupied father, yeah.
Yeah.
He becomes preoccupied with fathering and foraging, not with fighting and dominating.
Right. If you're spending all your time bringing home a carcass or standing guard over your cave, you just have less time and, frankly, less energy for constant brawls with your rival.
And what's really fascinating here is the direct correlation that zoologists have found across tons of species.
What's that?
The more time and energy males spend fathering meaning, the more invested they are in raising and feeding their young, the less they fight among themselves.
That's a direct relationship.
A direct inverse relationship. Committing to the quality strategy naturally cuts down on the destructive competition that's just built into the quantity strategy.
So when resources get pooled and reliably sent to a specific family unit, the need for constant war just kind of fades away.
It fades because the payoff for fighting goes down, while the payoff for provisioning goes way, way up. And this really laid the foundation for more stability in those early hominid groups.
So the devoted protective father isn't just a nice guy, it's actually the ultimate evolutionary power move.
It's not altruism, no. It's an efficiency model for reproduction that happens to result in more social cohesion.
Investment creates stability.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving from the abstract theory to some more vivid examples, we can see this conflict between quantity and quality playing out in the wild, and sometimes with shockingly high stakes.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because nature just lays bare the costs of these two different strategies.
The animal kingdom gives us these perfect, magnified illustrations of the extremes. If you want to understand the pure, unfiltered quantity strategy, you have to start with the elephant seals.
Ah, the elephant seal breeding beach. It's legendary, isn't it? And not in a good way. It's like the ultimate bachelor party that just ends in carnage.
It is absolute war. And the stakes are truly existential. You're talking about these massive multi-ton bull seals just battling relentlessly. They're roaring, they're slamming their bodies into each other, leaving these deep, bloody gashes.
It's brutal. And there was a study on this, right, by a zoologist named Bernie LeBouf.
Yes, and his findings are a textbook example of hyperpolygyny. It's all driven by pure physical combat. He and his team studied 115 bull elephant seals.
115. And what did they find about who was, actually succeeding, who was passing on their genes?
The success was concentrated in a shockingly small group. Out of all 115 contenders, only 5, the absolute biggest and meanest warriors, managed to control the harems.
Just 5.
Just 5. And those 5 sired an astounding 85% of all the offspring born that season.
85%. That's an almost impossibly high barrier to entry.
It is. It means that roughly 90% of the adult male bull seals died virgins. They failed completely to pass on their genes. That's a staggering evolutionary failure rate for the vast majority of males who are all pursuing this quantity strategy.
And even for the winners, for those triumphant 5, the cost of that glory is immense.
It's astronomical. They get their brief, brutal season of war and orgy, where they don't eat for weeks and just fight constantly to defend their territory. but they're often so weakened, so exhausted, and so badly wounded from all the fighting.
That they're dead by the next year.
Often, yes. They can't defend their dominance again. It's a biological strategy that literally burns out the winners and eliminates almost all of the losers.
Talk about treating your life expectancy for reproductive success.
That's the trade.
But the sources say the platypus is an even more severe example, in a way, specifically in how the sex ratio gets sort of engineered long before they're even old enough to mate.
Right. The platypus shows as lethal competition starting from the juvenile stage. It's all about filtering the male population early. So you start with a roughly equal number of male and female babies. But the young males have this unique, dangerous weapon, a poisonous spine on their hind legs, and they use it aggressively against their own brothers and other male peers.
So they're killing each other off before they even get to the age where they'd be competing for mates.
That is precisely right. The male juvenile mortality rate is so incredibly high because of this infighting that by the time that generation is ready to mate, the sex ratio is completely skewed.
What's the ratio?
Our sources point to a ratio of 6 females for every single surviving male.
6 to 1.
6 to 1. This scarcity leaves a very small group of victorious and highly lethal warriors to sire the entire next generation. The competition is intense, it's deadly, and it ensures only the absolute toughest males even survive to reproduce.
So on one extreme, you've got the seal who dies exhausted after one season of glory, and on the other, you've got the platypus who literally kills his way to reproductive success. It sounds just exhausting.
It's a tough world out there.
Let's pivot now to the other side, to the animals that show us the quality and investment strategy, the dedicated dads. And we can start with the red fox.
Yes, the male red fox is a classic example of serial monogamy and tremendous paternal devotion in the mammalian world. He really embodies that provisioning role perfectly.
And his provisioning is relentless. The sources say he brings home a dead rabbit or some other prey every 6 hours.
Every 6 hours.
That is intense, sustained work, focused entirely on feeding the vixen and the pucks.
That consistent supply every 6 hours is the ultimate insurance policy against starvation for that litter. And it's not just about the calories. The male red fox is also heavily involved in curriculum development, you could say.
Curriculum development. I like that.
He teaches his pups vital survival skills. He shows them how to stalk, how to hunt. They even bury food to give the pups practice in sniffing it out later.
So that's resource investment plus knowledge transfer. You're ensuring the long-term viability of your genes. That level of commitment really suggests a strong selection against the promiscuous male gene. But even in this devoted dad, that ancient programming is still there, isn't it? What's the catch?
And there is a crucial, inescapable catch. The source notes that despite all this devotion, all this work, all this resource pooling, if a young foxette in heat slings by, the devoted male red fox absolutely notices.
He notices.
His capacity for the quantity strategy hasn't been bred out of him. It's just suppressed by the more immediate need to provide for his current family.
So the commitment is real, the investment is real, but the option is never fully off the table. It just shows that tension we talked about. The pair bonding doesn't totally erase the primal quantity strategy.
It just puts the quality strategy first.
And for a really charming and very specific example of this commitment, we look to the Jungarian hamster.
Ah, yes, a tiny rodent from Mongolia. This little guy is the absolute definition of a dedicated father.
Tell us what this little champion does. It's one of the most memorable details in the source material.
He is a champion provider, just in miniature. He diligently goes out and harvests seeds, stuffs them into these enormous cheek pouches, and then he scurries back to the burrow.
Right.
And once he's there, he stands in front of his pups, which are born blind and helpless, and he performs this very specific trick to deliver the food.
The famous seed spraying trick.
That's the one. He hits his cheeks with both his forepaws at the same time to spray the seeds all over the pups.
It's an effective, if maybe a bit messy, way to do it.
Very effective. It ensures every pup gets fed. The sources humorously compare it to John Belushi's old zit joke in the movie Animal House.
Right. And he does more than just provide food. He's constantly there. He even acts as a midwife during the birth.
He does. The source says he slaps her cheeks with his forepaws, which, sounds a bit aggressive to us, but it seems to be a behavioral adaptation to stimulate the birth process. It's constant high-level attention that's essential for the survival of the litter.
It is. It's the kind of intense effort that maximizes pup survival. But here's the critical point. the one that reinforces the main theme of this whole deep dive.
Even this dedicated little rodent, the one who does the John Belushi trick and acts as a midwife,
Yeah.
he might still act like a rat if he meets another fertile female on, say, a business trip far from home.
The capacity for infidelity is just dormant. It's always there, ready to be activated. The underlying hum of that quantity strategy is always present, even when the quality strategy is dominating his day-to-day life.
My analysis really confirms this point. The genes for an overriding quality strategy will never be able to completely select against a quantity strategy in any animal that produces millions of sperm.
Because there's always more.
Always. No matter how much work and investment a male puts into his existing kids, he always has spare sperm and the inherent biological imperative to use it. The source frames it perfectly. It reminds us that when your reproductive resource is like the continuous flow of Old Faithful.
Yeah, it's much harder to be faithful.
Exactly. The biological cost of infidelity is almost zero, so the capacity for it has to persist.
So when we take this biological wiring and apply it to Homo sapiens, with all our complex psychology and self-awareness, it creates this profound and often really confusing emotional landscape.
It does.
The source argues that this evolutionary split, the fact that both quantity and quality strategies were successful, it leaves men inheriting two different kinds of sexual desire.
Yes. This is rooted deep in our evolutionary history, because nature rewarded men for fathering two very different kinds of children.
Which were?
There were the children they invested in and provided for, the children of wives, and then there were the children they abandoned, the children of concubines or, temporary flings.
And both sets of genes made it into the gene pool.
Both contributed to the male's overall reproductive success, and so both types of desire were passed down through the generations.
And this leads directly to a lot of emotional and psychological confusion in modern men.
Tremendous confusion.
We're talking about the man who feels this purely lustful, primal urge to impregnate someone, and then immediately feels this deep, confusing compulsion to just run away and avoid all responsibility.
Right. And that same man might then get someone else pregnant out of deep, committed love and then proceed to work his entire life away, sacrificing his own well-being for that wife and that family.
The key point here is that this duality isn't usually some cynical, malicious plan.
No, not at all. It's the result of evolution passing on two successful, yet often contradictory, survival strategies: pair bonding for resource allocation, and sperm spreading for maximum genetic reach.
So men are often just experiencing the push and pull of these two very different feelings at the same time.
They are. It reflects their ancient dual reproductive goals.
Now let's contrast that internal conflict with the female experience, which our sources say is far less divided. It's much more focused on securing resources and ensuring quality.
That's because the biological investment is just radically and immediately different. Women don't have extra eggs to toss around. There are no spare eggs.
Right.
The investment is immediate, it's internal, and it is immense. A baby comes from her body, full stop. And it requires her sustained physical energy no matter what the father's character is or if he's willing to help.
The source puts it very vividly. She can't just attach the baby to the husband's breast while she goes out hunting with her friends.
She can't. The investment, the physical risk, it's immediate, it's non-transferable, and it's entirely hers.
And this unequal investment puts this enormous specialized pressure on women when it comes to sexual behavior. She has to entice men to get the investment and good genes she needs.
But she runs this huge existential risk if that same behavior is seen as promiscuous.
Right. The second she's perceived as promiscuous, she risks being put firmly and immediately into the concubine category.
Which means zero paternal investment, as opposed to the wife category, which guarantees resources. That perception immediately triggers what's called the paternity assurance principle in the male.
Okay, let's define the paternity assurance principle clearly, because it feels central to all of this. It's more than just a man worrying, is the kid mine?
It's a massive evolutionary cost calculation. Wasting your resources, whether that's a rabbit you hunted, a year of your labor, or protection from predators, on a child that is not genetically yours is the fastest possible route to genetic extinction.
Because the male lineages that invested in other men's children simply didn't survive to reproduce?
They didn't. So evolution selected fiercely for men who prioritize cues of female fidelity and reproductive loyalty.
So the behavior that results from this is things like sexual jealousy, mate guarding, and this intense preference for perceived chastity in a long-term partner.
Exactly. And it's not a cultural construct. It's a deep-seated evolutionary mechanism designed to protect scarce and hard-won resources.
A man is just biologically less inclined to dedicate those resources to a woman whose behavior suggests low paternity assurance. The risk is just too high.
The risk is too high.
We actually have some incredibly specific modern data that shows this duality perfectly. It shows how differently men and women approach potential partners based on the level of commitment. I'm talking about the Intelligence Requirement Survey.
Ah, yes, this is a classic study. It just illuminates this core conflict so brilliantly.
So what did they do?
Initially, the researchers asked people about the minimum intelligence they'd require in a potential date. And pretty predictably, both men and women gave the same general answer.
Which was?
Average intelligence. You know, someone you could have a conversation with, someone who wouldn't embarrass you.
Makes sense. But then they asked a very specific, high-stakes follow-up question that just blew the results apart.
They did. They asked, how intelligent would the date have to be just to have sex with them? So the context is purely casual, no commitment.
And the answers just split right down gender lines.
Immediately, it reveals the underlying strategies. The women said they would require above-average intelligence.
Even for a casual encounter.
Even for a short-term fling. This is quality screening in action. Women are prioritizing resourcefulness, competence, good genes, ensuring that genetic contribution is high quality just in case conception happens.
And the men, shockingly, or maybe not shockingly at all, given what we've been discussing, they said they would require below-average intelligence.
This stark difference just underscores the whole conflict. In a casual mating context, men prioritize physical cues of availability and fertility over the markers of a long-term partnership, like intelligence.
For sex without commitment, the male's biological bar drops through the floor.
It does, because the investment cost is basically zero, and the only criteria that matter are fertility and availability. For women, though, the genetic bar actually rises, even for short-term hookups.
This duality brings us back to Freud's original, very dramatic analysis of the Madonna-whore complex.
Right. Where they love, they cannot desire. Where they desire, they cannot love. The idea that men can't reconcile lust and commitment.
But the source offers a really important and, I think, more humane refinement to that idea.
It does. It suggests that it's not necessarily that bad, and that the split is actually reconcilable in the human mind. Men can feel both lust and love for the same woman.
But there's a but.
There's a but. This successful integration only happens when she embodies those two divergent reproductive goals at the same time.
She has to check both of the evolutionary boxes, which are?
She must have, as the source puts it, baby birthing bodies and baby-rearing behaviors.
Okay, break that down.
The youthful, fertile body appeals to that playboy impulse. It signals high reproductive capacity, immediate fertility. But the loyal, stable, resource-managing behavior appeals to the father impulse. It signals long-term reliability and high paternity assurance.
So the conflict only really emerges when those two things, the fertility signals and the fidelity signals, don't seem to align perfectly in one partner.
Which, given the complexity of human life, happens all the time.
And we have to remember, this duality isn't just a male thing.
No, it isn't. Just as every man has the potential for a playboy and a father, women also carry the potential for both sides of the strategy. They have the concubine desire and the wife desire in their genes too.
Meaning, the desire to seek out good genes. That's the concubine strategy, focusing on immediate biological quality, health, vigor.
And the desire to seek good fathers, the wife strategy, which focuses on long-term provision, stability, and security.
And while many women might be able to conceive healthy babies using that short-term good gene strategy,
the vast, undeniable prevalence of the wife strategy, the long-term pair bond across all human societies, just proves its superior evolutionary success for gene survival in the long run. If that preference for wife status hadn't been so incredibly successful at keeping offspring alive, it just wouldn't have evolved to be the human default.
Okay, so now we have to address the elephant in the 21st century room, the biggest challenge to all these evolutionary ideas.
Right.
We have reliable contraception. Women have achieved massive earning power. Economic independence is more and more the norm. So what does all this evolutionary logic mean for the high-earning modern woman who objectively does not need a man's resources to survive or to raise children?
This is a critical point where biology meets culture, and our sources have some really surprising, counterintuitive answers based on serious research.
The logical assumption would be that as women get wealthier, their demand for a man's wealth and status would go down. It would level the playing field.
That would be the logical assumption.
Mm.
But the data, specifically from these influential studies by researchers like David Buss and Bruce Ellis, shows the exact opposite of that.
The opposite.
The exact opposite. They both showed, across different U.S. populations, that high-earning women are actually even more demanding in their desire for status, wealth, and professional achievement in men.
So the higher a woman's economic standing, the higher and more stringent the bar she sets for her potential mate's status and wealth.
That's the pattern, and it holds consistently. The high-powered CEO woman isn't necessarily looking for a nice, supportive guy who makes less money and can stay home with the kids. She wants an alpha, and she wants him to be even richer and more powerful than she is.
We see this pattern everywhere. Female millionaires want male billionaires.
Right. And B.J. Ellis's work was particularly interesting. He showed that even women who are intellectually committed to egalitarianism, like, say, leaders of certain feminist organizations, still often demand wealthy men as mates in their personal lives.
It's an unconscious preference that just overrides their stated cultural genes.
It is. And historically, you see this pattern repeated at the very apex of power. It confirms that even having supreme status doesn't get rid of the drive to secure even more.
You look at icons like Jackie Kennedy or Princess Diana. After securing literal royalty, they still moved on to be with men of supreme, abstract status billionaires like Aristotle Onassis or Dodi Fade.
Or go back further to Cleopatra, a literal queen, sometimes seen as a god by her own people. She had trouble finding a mate whose status was high enough.
Only an emperor like Julius Caesar or Mark Antony would do.
Exactly. And even those pairings were filled with tension over who was truly the dominant one. It just illustrates the problem.
Yeah.
When you are the top woman, that innate preference still pushes you to try and marry up, driven by this ancient mandate for resource security.
Which brings us to the fundamental question. Why? Why does this deep preference for status and resource control persist, even with all our modern economic safety nets? Why does logic seem to fail us here?
The answer, according to the sources, is in the deep primal memory of famine and catastrophic scarcity. It's etched into our mammalian limbic systems,
The old part of the brain.
the ancient part of the brain that structures our strongest emotions and our survival desires. That part of our brain remembers true scarcity, a time where failure meant immediate death, not just, bankruptcy.
Right. Logically, a highly paid, independent woman with a 401k doesn't need a man's help to survive a recession.
She doesn't. But her mammalian brain remembers that when a real famine hits or when a true catastrophe strikes the tribe, the young die first. And the most powerful, the ones who control the most territory, the most resources, the highest status, they're the ones who get the spoils and protect their own offspring.
So the pursuit of status in a mate isn't really about covering next month's mortgage.
Oh.
It's about covering the catastrophic survival-level need for security during a total collapse. It's the ultimate, deeply programmed insurance policy.
It's that deep, non-rational Pleistocene need for companionship and maximum resource assurance. It just remains a fundamental, visceral part of our nature. Wealth today is simply the most abstract proxy we have for absolute resource control.
The sources note that whether or not we need each other practically, we'll always need each other emotionally because those emotions are structured around genetic survival.
That's right.
And this dynamic brings us to this general rule about the spoils dynamic. It suggests that whichever sex gets control of the spoils, the resources, the status, the power, spoils it for the other sex.
And historically, in most societies, men have held that power over resources and have generally set the moral codes. The result is, well, it's consistent. They surround themselves with what are effectively harems of extra wombs.
They maximize their quantity strategy because they control the resources needed to make all those different offspring survive.
The existence of polygyny and resource hoarding are the clearest signs of male control of resources.
And this dynamic is key to understanding the final section of our deep dive. What happens when you flip the script? When you give women the power and the scarcity advantage?
A fascinating question.
It's easy for us, as modern observers, to just dismiss these evolutionary drivers as cultural mandates from a patriarchy. But let's look at a real-world scenario where the gender power dynamics were completely reversed. A clean test case for this behavior.
We're talking about the Bakweri people of Cameroon.
The Bakweri. They offer this crucial counterpoint to the idea that female dominance would just lead to, a more altruistic society.
Right. Because of mass immigration patterns, their society ended up with a drastically skewed gender balance. 2.5 men for every 1 woman.
2.5 to 1. That creates a profound power imbalance in favor of the women. economically and socially.
It does. The sources describe this context as a man's dystopia, and from another angle, a feminist utopia.
So how did the Bakweri women respond when they held all the power, the scarcity, and the economic control?
They leveraged it for maximum resource advantage. The women own the vital plantations, they hoard all the money. But the important observation here is that they do not create a benevolent, egalitarian society. Instead, they operate a profound system of resource gatekeeping.
They can afford to be incredibly selective, and they demand disposable husbands, but only from the small fraction of men who have resources or physical strength.
Exactly. They treat men as workhorses, and they have zero hesitation in citing economic ineptitude as the precise, socially acceptable reason for divorce.
So they just divorce them as soon as a richer or more promising guy comes along.
Swiftly and ruthlessly, they are optimizing their quality strategy with exceptional efficiency.
This behavior really challenges a lot of idealized notions about how women would act if they held all the power. The efficiency with which they discard partners based on economic failure is really striking.
The Bakweri case just highlights that when either sex is in a position of economic dominance and scarcity, they will optimize their reproductive and resource fitness aggressively. They seek the best possible provider, and if he fails to provide, he's discarded without sentiment.
Because there's always a better option available due to that skewed sex ratio.
Always.
This economic power imbalance also creates a really shocking paradox when it comes to Bakweri prostitution. If the women have all the money and power, why is prostitution thriving, and why would women do it?
Because it is a profound seller's market, driven entirely by that 2.5 to 1 gender imbalance and the desperation of the men.
I see.
Single Bakweri women leverage their scarcity to build wealth. They charge absolutely exorbitant sums for sexual services to these desperate, resource-poor men who have no other way to secure a wife.
So they're using their scarcity not just for immediate cash, but as a deliberate strategy to build a foundation for their future.
Precisely. They amass a sizable treasury through these services, and they then use that money strategically. They buy property, they secure their economic base, they elevate their own status.
So by the time they're ready to get married?
By that time, these entrepreneurettes have, fistfuls of cash and acres of property. They claim their first husband, a desirable, resourceful man, and then, as the source grimly notes, they proceed to bleed him dry, Black Widow style, using his labor and his resources while they retain all the power.
It's a strategy that ensures their future offspring's survival is absolutely maximized.
Absolutely.
And this Bakweri situation where economic incompetence is the main reason for divorce, it leads us right to the analysis of cross-cultural divorce universals.
It does. It suggests that this drive for resource provision is deeply programmed across almost all human societies.
There was a survey by an anthropologist, Suzanne Fraser.
That's right. She surveyed divorced people across 48 traditional cultures, and the data is just unequivocal about the gender asymmetry of provision versus reproduction.
Okay, so what were the top reasons men cited for divorce across those cultures?
The number one reason given by men was infertility, which was typically, and often unfairly, blamed on the woman. This reflects the male reproductive calculus, right? Fertility is essential.
And for women?
For women, one of the top two reasons, consistently and globally, was that the man was a bad provider.
And this brings us to the ultimate power asymmetry in the marital contract worldwide.
Yes. The data showed that in 50 cultures where inadequate earning is a sanctioned reason for divorce, 49 of them allow only the woman to initiate the divorce on those economic grounds.
Only the woman. That legal and cultural structure reflects the fundamental evolutionary bargain.
It does. And critically, there is no known culture that allows only the man to divorce his wife specifically because she is a bad provider. That expectation of provision is a one-way street. It's a gendered mandate.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture,
it just confirms this universal, deep-seated concept of male provision. The female expectation of and reliance on male resource sharing is so evolutionarily successful that the social and legal structure of marriage across dozens of diverse cultures enshrines the woman's right to leave if that provision fails.
And that holds true even in an extreme case like the Bakweri, where the women have all the economic power.
Even then, the resource mandate persists.
So that evolutionary demand for resource provision is the ultimate constant in human pairing. It's the selective pressure that keeps the playboy gene in check. Because at the end of the day, mere sperm isn't enough for our species to survive.
It's not. It's the sustained, relentless delivery of resources, like that dead rabbit every 6 hours, that ensures the success of human genes.
We've had quite the deep dive today, tracing this tension between the jerk gene, that evolutionary default of sperm abundance and promiscuity, and the absolute necessity of resource investment for our complex, slow to mature human offspring.
Hmm.
Our deepest, most visceral desires are really just reflections of these ancient evolutionary trade-offs.
The lesson from the animal kingdom, from the human studies, seems to be pretty clear. The capacity for quantity and infidelity will always exist for the sperm producer.
Right.
But the long-term, overwhelming success of the human lineage relies so heavily on the male shifting to that quality strategy. And that shift is driven by the female's consistent, cross-cultural insistence on paternal investment assurance.
And the paradox of the high-earning modern woman just confirms it. Even with these immense modern advancements, high paychecks, global economies, full economic independence, it doesn't fully override the deep primal structure of human desire.
Not at all.
We still seek status, we still seek absolute resource control, and we still seek protection for our young, even if that threat is just the ghost of a phantom famine from the Pleistocene. The fear is visceral, not logical.
The structure of our desire remains rooted in survival, even if the forms of achieving that survival have become more abstract.
Which leads to our final provocative thought for you to consider. The sources make it clear that both sexes are capable of optimizing their reproductive fitness when they're in a position of power and scarcity.
Yeah.
So, look around at modern dating. The focus on career ladders, on degrees, on intellectual capital. Are the fundamental drivers we discussed, paternal investment assurance and resource seeking? Are they changing only in form? Are we just trading inherited land for intellectual prowess and career status?
Or is the underlying function seeking security and high-quality partners to ensure the survival and success of future offspring? Is that function remaining exactly the same, regardless of our 21st century context?
Something worth mulling over as you navigate your own pairing strategies and watch how resources flow around you.
Indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.